Hi there. You will have to excuse me today for glancing down at my notes quite a bit because I want to make sure that now that I'm getting back into composition again that I don't end up missing anything. When discussing composition, it's entirely artificial to separate each of these concepts and look at them in isolation. However, we do need to understand them all. We do need to at least have a concept of how each one of these things will affect an image. Now, I've already looked at the image armature. Okay, the image armature is just a geometric tool. The armature itself is not a physical part. It's not a subject of the image. Instead, it's just a way of organizing the components in the image, the elements of the image, in a pleasing fashion. Most of the time, it's a case of the photographer looking for something that seems to fit the pattern, rather than trying to force it into the pattern. So, where is it used? Well, as I mentioned at the time, Henri Cartier-Bresson was very big on the geometry of an image, and he was one who used that image armature, in particularly the way that it fit onto a 3:2 ratio, because he shot Leicas, which was 35mm film, which means that the ratio of length to width was 3:2. Then we have, closely related to that, of course, we had the rule of thirds, which again is really just a simplification of any one of a number of other implications. For instance, when we look at the golden mean, which I also mentioned here before, the golden mean or the image armature, all of them will give you an approximation to the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is, for all intent and purposes, a simplification of those far more complex concepts. Now, these were all artificial elements. They are not actually in the image. They are ways of organizing the image. Today I want to look at a compositional tool that's actually a part of the image. Leading lines. Leading lines are in the frame. They are a part of the image. They cannot be separated. They cannot be taken out and viewed as just a structure that helps to organize things. Instead, they are an actual, real part of the image. The result is that when you look at an example of an image that has very strong case of leading lines, you notice that the elements within the image now actually form a line. Now that line could be straight, it could be curved, it could have sharp corners, it could be a zigzag. It doesn't matter as long as it defines a path, and that's the key, a path. Because leading lines, as the name implies, should lead you through an image. Okay, they lead you into the image, or they lead you through the image, or they might even lead you out of the image. Since we typically view a scene from bottom to top, because let's face it, out in the real world we look down at our feet and then we look off into the distance. So this bottom to top view means that quite often leading lines start low in the frame and work their way up to through the frame. Often possibly no further than the center, but sometimes right on through. So if our lines go from bottom to top, that's usually the preferable way. Now, at the same time, as you are well aware, if we're taking pictures of a very elegant ceiling in a building, then we're looking up, and it may have lines that will converge from that ceiling, converge off into the distance. So we have leading lines now that are above us, and therefore they start on the outer edges of the top of the frame and move their way into the frame. Now notice in both cases here I spoke of converging. Leading lines do not have to converge. But if they do converge, they tend to bring us into an even closer focus on something within that frame. And that something within that frame may be the subject. I said maybe the subject for a very simple reason. The leading lines themselves may be the subject of the image. It is quite possible that we would have an image of a meandering river with no real focal point beyond the river itself. If you look at the work of Ansel Adams, you'll often find the meandering river, but it usually leads you to something, often a mountain or something off in the distance. If you look at the converging lines of, let's take the old cliche of the railway track, and if you actually, stand somewhere behind a rail car that's stopped at a siding, and you get low and take that shot, you will actually now have converging lines made up of rails that take you right to that train car. So there, the train car becomes the focus, and if it's a red painted caboose, you really have a powerful looking image, even though it's quite simple. The fear with leading lines is not getting cliche. I used the railway tracks as an example. That has become a bit of a cliche. Everybody who sees a straight section of railway tracks will get down low with their wide-angle lens and take a picture of it. The wharf going out into a pond is another example of a cliche. Now, does that mean you shouldn't shoot them? Of course not. But what it means is that if you can find some way to make them more original, if you can find a way of taking what would normally be considered a cliche and making it into something original, then you've really succeeded in a good image. Now, I really don't have a lot more to say about that right now. As I said at the beginning, too often we take all of these compositional rules, and I please don't get upset by my use of that word. I know they're not rules. They are guidelines. They are merely a way that we have discovered that the world maybe looks a little more pleasing when displayed in a two-dimensional medium, like a painting or a photograph. But if we become really pedantic about it, if we slavishly follow a carefully prescribed formula for rule of thirds and leading lines and image armatures and diagonals, if we get totally wrapped up in that, then of course we are going to make an awful lot of bland, repetitive images. Because your image is not going to show any originality if it is a copy of the last image you did, because you're following the same formula. The subject matter might be completely different, but the way you framed it, you've just created the same thing again. So be bold. Apply these. Apply them in groups. Find a place where, by using rule of thirds and converging lines, you can really highlight a point in your image. Try something like that. And then completely break the rules. Put your horizon very high in the image and have mostly the land. Put it very low and have lots of negative space for the sky. Put your subject way over to one side so that there's a different sense of space than if you followed strictly that rule of thirds. Anyhow, I don't have much more to say about that right now. I will be doing more compositional videos. There will be a little bit more about simplification of gear. Just recently I came to the conclusion that when you have a good camera and one that is one generation older, and you're taking the one generation older camera out all the time instead of using the good one, probably time to sell that one generation older camera. So I did. Anyhow, I will be continuing this series on composition. I will also still be looking at the idea of looking at some older SLR cameras, in case anybody does come along with one. I may just use the 2 older cameras I have here, take a few sample images with them, post them in a later video under my gear section. But this is going to be composition mainly. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, of course, give me a like. If you want to see more of my videos, be sure to subscribe to this channel. And of course, if you think anybody can get anything positive from this, then please share it. Well, bye for now.